Look, we came, we saw, he died. We came, we saw, he died. Look, we came, we saw, he died. Look, we came, we saw, he died.
It's not a laughing matter. I take it really seriously.
Vote for me because I'm a woman. One of my merits is I'm a woman. But all these mothers vote for me because I'm a woman. Because I'm a woman. Vote for me because I'm a woman. One of my merits is I'm a woman. But all these mothers vote for me because I'm a woman. Because I'm a woman.
A woman running to be the first woman president.
I cannot imagine anyone being more of an outsider than the first woman
Who can
president.
be more of an outsider than a woman president?
Well, I can't think of anything more of an outsider than electing the first woman president.
A woman president of the United States of America. Women.
Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. Today's show is brought to you by tulipblooms.shop. Promo code Shapiro for free shipping and 10% off. I bring to you one piece today, and that is what you've been waiting for at badlands.substack.com. Joe Lang. What difference does Benghazi make? They never thought she would lose. Why is Benghazi so important? Was Benghazi just the next safe haven for terrorists trained by the CIA and the Obama administration? Trump mentioned that. Donald Trump on Twitter, December 17th, 2013, Benghazi is now a full-blown training center for jihadists. Congratulations to the Obama administration. Libya became a safe haven for terrorists, and Benghazi was at the center of it all. Trump not only knew that Benghazi had been turned into a full-blown training center for jihadists, he also knew that President Obama was responsible for it. Why was Libya turned into a safe haven for terrorist training? The never-ending war on terror has been a complete lie from the beginning. President Bush took us to war in Afghanistan because it had become the training center for jihadists who were blamed for the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center. That wasn't the reason we went to war in Afghanistan, but I'll get to that in a coming article on 9/11. The CIA shadow government needed a new safe haven training center for jihadists. And by overthrowing Gaddafi, Al-Qaeda now controlled the government in Libya. It was the perfect place to fund, train, and arm terrorists, while our controlled media painted the new Libya as a fledgling democracy that needed our support, taxpayers' money. After waging war against terrorist training camps in Afghanistan, we were now using taxpayer money to build training camps in Libya. Benghazi also exposes something else. The Benghazi scandal proved that politics is just a big game to fool the American people. Politicians on both sides are just a big part of the club. Trump has known for a long time that politics is just a game, and he was doing his best to expose it years before he ever announced he was running for president. Have you ever seen this tweet? Donald Trump, May 19th, 2015. Remember when Jeb gave Hillary a medal on the one-year anniversary of Benghazi? Guess he would have invaded Libya too. Trump already knew who his two main opponents would be in the upcoming 2016 election. Trump was fighting against the establishment and knew that he faced enemies in both parties, but Trump purposely tied Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton to Benghazi. Why? Remember, Jeb Bush is a CIA asset and was also a bagman for his dad. I wrote about that in my earlier article in this series titled A Family Affair. Did you know that Jeb had given an award to Hillary on the night before the 1-year anniversary of the attack in Benghazi? According to the Daily Signal, Jeb Bush prepares to present the Liberty Medal to Hillary Rodham Clinton on September 10th, 2013. Seated with her is Jeffrey Rosen, president and CEO of the National Constitution Center. Quote, a conservative group's new online ad portrays Jeb Bush as unelectable to the presidency because the Republican presented a public service award to the Democrat favorite Hillary Rodham Clinton. Clinton received the award, the video emphasizes, on September 10th, 2013, 1 day short of the first anniversary of the terrorist attacks on U.S. facilities in Benghazi, Libya, that left 4 Americans dead and stained her legacy as Secretary of State.
I want to say thank you to both Secretary Clinton and to President Clinton. Thank you for your service to our country. We're united by love of country and public service.
And I want to say a special thank you to Governor Bush. Now, this is not the first time that a Clinton and a Bush have shared this stage.
Politics has always been a scam, and our elections are a fraud. Hillary and Jeb were the frontrunners in the 2016 election, and both were fully controlled by the cabal. It was supposed to be Hillary's turn, but Trump changed all of that. The military was never going to let Hillary become president. Can anyone forget this defining moment when Hillary was giving her testimony before Congress on Benghazi? Do you think Jeb Bush had forgotten her testimony when he decided to give her a medal for her public service?
People have accused Ambassador Rice and the administration of, misleading Americans. I can say, trying to be in the middle of this and understanding what was going on, nothing could be further from the truth. Was information developing? Was the situation fluid? Would we reach conclusions later that weren't reached initially? And I appreciate
Madam Secretary, do you disagree with me that a simple phone call to those evacuees to determine what happened wouldn't have ascertained immediately that there was no protest? I mean, that was a piece of information that could have been easily obtained.
Well, but Senator,
within hours, if not days.
Senator, when you're in these positions, the last thing you want to do is interfere with any other process going on.
I realize that's a good excuse.
Number two, no, it's the fact. Number two, I would recommend highly you read both what the ARB said about it and the classified ARB, because even today there are questions being raised. Now, we have no doubt they were terrorists, they were militants, they attacked us, they killed our people. But what was going on and why they were doing what they were doing?
No. Again, we were misled that there were supposedly protests and then something sprang out of that, an assault sprang out of that. And that was easily ascertained that was not the fact. And the American people could have known that within days, and they didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator. Now, honestly, I will do my best to answer your questions about this, but the fact is that people were trying in real time to get to the best information. The IC has a process, I understand, going with the other committees to explain how these talking points came out. But, you know, to be clear, it is, from my perspective, less important today, looking backwards, as to why these militants decided they did it, than to find them and bring them to justice. And then maybe we'll figure out what was going on in the meantime.
Hillary testified that it's less important today, looking backwards, as to why these militants decided they did it, than to find them and bring them to justice. For a week, she lied about the attackers being protesters to hide the fact that they were Al-Qaeda. She definitely didn't want anybody investigating why the terrorists attacked the consulate. But Hillary's testimony before the Senate that day was all just political theater. Nothing was going to happen to her. John McCain played a huge part in the political theater by keeping the focus away from Al-Qaeda. He did his best to frame the cover-up on a red herring argument that would distract the American people from the real reason the consulate was attacked. Pay attention to Hillary's facial expressions and smile as McCain questions her. She doesn't seem threatened at all. I believe she expected and welcomed this argument.
Months after the Benghazi tragedy, it's a tragedy when we lose 4 brave Americans, there are many questions that are unanswered. And the answers, frankly, that you've given this morning are not satisfactory to me. Were you and the president made aware of the classified cable from Chris Stevens said that the United States consulate in Benghazi could not survive a sustained assault? Numerous warnings, including personally to me, about the security were unanswered or unaddressed. It took a CNN reporter looking through the consulate to find Chris Stevens' last warning. When were you made aware of that cable? When were you made aware of the attack on the British ambassador and the assassination attempts and the closing of the consulates there? And what actions were taken? What was the president's activities during that 7-hour period? On the anniversary of the worst attack in American history, September 11th, we didn't have Department of Defense forces available for 7 hours. 2 brave Americans died in the last hour. With all these warnings, all these things took place, we didn't have a single Department of Defense asset apparently available to come to these rescues. I categorically reject your answer to Senator Johnson about, well, we didn't ask these survivors who were flown to Ramstein the next day that this was not a spontaneous demonstration. To say that it's because an investigation was going on, the American people deserve to know answers, and they certainly don't deserve false answers.
It's quite the contrast to her reaction when Senator Ron Johnson was asking her if she knew it was terrorists who attacked the consulate and killed Ambassador Stevens. McCain really talked tough, but the truth is both Hillary and McCain not only knew it was a terrorist attack from the beginning, they also knew who the terrorists were and why they attacked. McCain was part of the cover-up. McCain's role during these investigations was to keep the focus on the lack of security at the consulate and the failure to respond. He helped Hillary avoid talking about Al-Qaeda's involvement in Benghazi. Why would he do that?
Senator McCain, I have one question I can't let you get away without asking, because Hillary Clinton has said that you are her favorite Republican. And I just want to ask you, is she your favorite Democrat?
Actually, I hope this program is blacked out in Arizona. Please cut. No, look, I respect Secretary Senator Clinton. I respect her views. We have had disagreements on a number of issues, but I think it's my job to work with every president if she is. Regrettably, if she attains the presidency. I worked with her in the Senate. I just worked with Senator Sanders on a Veterans Affairs bill. We've got to fix a VA. How do you do that? You've got to reach across the aisle and work together on certain issues. And I'm not only not embarrassed about that, I'm proud of it. And I respect Hillary Clinton. I may not agree with her.
All right. Well, thank you both.
Politics is just a big game. Here are the questions that McCain and Hillary didn't want the American people to focus on. 1, why was Ambassador Stevens in Benghazi in the first place? 2, why were there so many CIA operators in Benghazi at the time? 3, who were these terrorists who killed Stevens and who was funding and supplying them with weapons? The media tried their best to keep the focus off those questions. Why? There was a secret operation underway in Benghazi that involved both the State Department and the CIA. Trump tried to focus the American people on what was going on in Benghazi before the attack. Donald Trump on Twitter, August 2nd, 2013. Over 35 CIA operatives were on the ground in Benghazi the night of the 9/11 attack. Still a phony scandal? Obama was calling the investigations into Benghazi a phony scandal. 4 Americans had died. I guess he soon forgot this moment. Pictured here, the dead returning home, Obama and Hillary standing in front of a presidential hearse, hands on their hearts. It wasn't a phony scandal. The real story in Benghazi is treason. The enemy knew how dangerous this story was if exposed, and they desperately tried to hide it. According to CNN, quote, CNN has uncovered exclusive new information about what is allegedly happening at the CIA in the wake of the deadly Benghazi terror attack. Sources now tell CNN dozens of people working for the CIA were on the ground that night and that the agency is going to great lengths to make sure whatever it was doing remains a secret. CNN has learned the CIA is involved in what one source calls an unprecedented attempt to keep the spy agency's Benghazi secrets from ever leaking out. End quote. There were more CIA operatives in Benghazi than anybody knew at the time. CNN was reporting that the CIA was going through unprecedented attempts to keep their operation secret in Benghazi. How unprecedented were these CIA actions to keep what they were doing in Benghazi secret? More from CNN, quote, since January, some CIA operatives involved in the agency's missions in Libya have been subjected to frequent, even monthly, polygraph examinations, according to a source with deep inside knowledge of the agency's workings. The goal of the questioning, according to sources, is to find out if anyone is talking to the media or to Congress. It is being described as pure intimidation, with the threat that any unauthorized CIA employee who leaks information could face the end of his or her career. In exclusive communications obtained by CNN, one insider writes, "You don't jeopardize yourself, you jeopardize your family as well." Another says, "You have no idea the amount of pressure being brought to bear on anyone with knowledge of this operation." Agency employees typically are polygraphed every 3 to 4 years. Never more than that, said former CIA operative and CNN analyst Robert Baer. In other words, the rate of the kind of polygraphs alleged by sources is rare. End quote. Can you sense the level of panic? The CIA operation was bigger than anybody knew, and Congress was in the dark on what was happening. Anybody connected to that operation was being threatened and prevented from talking to Congress. They didn't want any whistleblowers. More from CNN. Among the many secrets still yet to be told about the Benghazi mission is just how many Americans were there the night of the attack. A source now tells CNN that number was 35. with as many as 7 wounded, some seriously, while it is still not known how many of them were CIA. A source tells CNN that 21 Americans were working in the building known as the Annex, believed to be run by the agency. End quote. Did you know that there were 7 other CIA operatives wounded in the Benghazi attack, and some seriously? I didn't know that. What else were they hiding? More from CNN, quote, "The lack of information and pressure to silence CIA operatives is disturbing to U.S. Rep. Frank Wolf, whose district includes CIA headquarters Langley, Virginia. In the aftermath of the attack, Wolf said he was contacted by people closely tied to the CIA operatives and contractors who wanted to talk. Then, suddenly, there was silence. Initially, they were not afraid to come forward. They wanted the opportunity, and they wanted to be subpoenaed, because if you're subpoenaed, it sort of protects you. You're forced to come before Congress. Now that's all changed," said Wolf. End quote. The CIA was finding out who the whistleblowers were and applying pressure, but I believe somebody was still helping to guide Congress in their questioning. More from CNN, quote, "Lawmakers also want to know about the weapons in Libya and what happened to them," end quote. This is another reason why toppling Gaddafi was so important to Obama, Hillary, and McCain. Libya had a huge supply of weapons, including the largest stockpile of surface-to-air missiles of any country that didn't manufacture them. If you want to arm your al-Qaeda proxies in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, why not give them control of a country with stockpiles of weapons? That would certainly keep the war going for many years. Al-Qaeda now had the perfect safe haven for training and was well supplied with weapons, all protected by a no-fly zone overseen by NATO. But if you've read my last few articles, then you know that Benghazi was about more than just a safe haven for Al-Qaeda. More from CNN, quote, "Speculation on Capitol Hill has included the possibility the U.S. agencies operating in Benghazi were secretly helping to move surface-to-air missiles out of Libya through Turkey and into the hands of Syrian rebels. It is clear that 2 U.S. agencies were operating in Benghazi. One was the State Department and the other was the CIA. The State Department told CNN in an email that it was only helping the new Libyan government destroy weapons deemed damaged, aged, or too unsafe to retain, and that it was not involved in any transfer of weapons to other countries. But the State Department also clearly told CNN they can't speak for any other agencies. The CIA would not comment on whether it was involved in the transfer of any weapons," end quote. Surface-to-air missiles are a big deal, and Gaddafi had stockpiled tens of thousands of them. A few members of Congress were speculating on what the CIA was desperately trying to keep secret. I think whistleblowers were feeding them information. Congress wanted to know if U.S. agencies were smuggling surface-to-air missiles out of Libya for the Syrian rebels trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. It was a similar playbook that the CIA had used in Afghanistan to help the Mujahideen defeat the Soviet Union. Hillary's State Department immediately distanced themselves from the accusation of surface-to-air missile transfers. They claimed that Stevens was there to destroy Gaddafi's old and dangerous weapons, not smuggle them out of the country. Then they threw the CIA under the bus, knowing full well that the CIA could hide all of their operations under the national security umbrella to hide evidence from Congress. The State Department and the CIA were never going to admit that they were secretly shipping surface-to-air missiles to Syria. But let's not forget this important fact. Both Hillary's State Department and the CIA were part of the Obama administration. Remember this portion of an important Q drop. Q drop number 2640 of December 21st, 2018. Hussein, ISIS JV team. Did ISIS form on Hussein's watch? Did Hussein take care of business or allow them to expand? How long did it take POTUS to eradicate and destroy ISIS? The American people are waking up to the truth. ISIS was created and expanded during the Obama administration, and the entire Benghazi scandal wasn't just focused on Libya, it was also focused on Syria. Here's Hillary's Twitter post from that Q drop. Hillary Clinton on Twitter, December 21st, 2018. Actions have consequences, and whether we're in Syria or not, the people who want to harm us are there and at war. Isolationism is weakness. Empowering ISIS is dangerous. Playing into Russia and Iran's hands is foolish. This president is putting our national security at grave risk. Hillary was bashing Trump for not supporting the Syrian rebels trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. But did you catch how Hillary just contradicted herself? Hillary was painting Assad and ISIS as our enemies, but the rebels fighting Assad were, in fact, ISIS. I proved that in an earlier article titled Transparency and Prosecution. So, who was our real enemy? Assad was not a threat to the United States, but ISIS was a threat to the world. Was Hillary the one empowering ISIS by shipping them weapons? Is that what Christopher Stevens was doing in Benghazi? A lot of people think he was trying to secure surface-to-air missiles, and that's why he was killed. But that theory is contradicted by several facts. Do you know when Christopher Stevens first went to Benghazi? Was it after Gaddafi was overthrown and killed in order to secure those weapons, or was he in Benghazi before then? According to Time, quote, though he only took up his position in May, he wasn't new to the region. An Arabic and French speaker, Stevens had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco, and after working in international trade law in Washington, served in Israel, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia during his 21 years with the State Department. But it was in Libya, where he also served as the number 2 U.S. diplomat from 2007 to 2009, where Stevens made his mark. His experience and credibility in a country that had long been off limits proved invaluable during the chaotic Libyan revolution, and his work helped convince the Obama administration to provide conclusive support to the besieged rebels. End quote. Stevens had worked in Libya before Obama became president, and he helped convince Obama to support the rebels trying to overthrow Gaddafi. But did you catch what Stevens specialized in? After he worked in international trade law, he served in Israel, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Those are 3 of our biggest purchasers of American weapons. Do you think that's just a coincidence? Why would being trained in international trade law be so important for Stevens' position in the State Department? Guess what the State Department is in charge of. According to Media Roots, quote, the U.S. government approved $40 billion in worldwide private arms sales in 2009, including more than $7 billion to Mid-East and North African nations that are struggling with political upheaval, the State Department reported. From 2008 to 2009, the U.S. authorized increasing sales of military shipments to the now toppled Egyptian government of Hosni Mubarak and the embattled Kingdom of Bahrain. But the U.S. reduced its defense sales approvals in 2009 to Muammar Gaddafi's Libyan government, which is now under a blanket weapons ban imposed last month by the Obama administration. Now, remember, as I pointed out in my last article, Gaddafi had negotiated a prisoner release of Abdel Hakim Belhaj and his fellow LIFG terrorists through a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in order to keep good relations with the new Obama administration. How did Obama respond to that goodwill gesture? Obama reduced weapons sales to Gaddafi and then imposed a complete weapons ban in Libya. Obama's plan was always to overthrow Gaddafi. There's a big reason for that. But guess who was in charge of approving weapons sales for the government? More from Media Roots. Quote, the $40 billion figure during the first year of the Obama administration reflects a rise in total approved arms sales over the final year of the Bush administration in 2008, when the State Department licensed $34.2 billion. The latest figures describe sales of military hardware, from missile systems to bullets that the State Department authorizes from private U.S. defense companies to other countries. The figures do not include direct U.S. military aid to other nations, providing a limited snapshot of the ebb and flow of American arms abroad. The State Department is in charge of authorizing the sale of weapons from private U.S. weapons companies to countries around the world. Do you think Hillary didn't know how much power that gave her as Secretary of State? Can you see why a secret, private server to conduct State Department business was so vital to Hillary, and why she would desperately try to delete 33,000 emails? The State Department was arming our enemies and doing a lot of it through private weapons companies. More from Media Roots, quote, "The new numbers issued in a report from State's Directorate of Defense Trade Controls indicate that international sales sought by U.S. defense firms have surged in the past 2 years, after holding steady for most of the 2000s in range of $20 billion, end quote. Under Hillary's supervision, the State Department had nearly doubled the average private weapons sales around the world. Why was Christopher Stevens so important to this operation in Benghazi? He not only worked at the State Department for Hillary, he was also experienced in international trade law. Stevens wasn't in Benghazi way back in 2008 to 2009 to sell weapons to Gaddafi. He was there to sell weapons to Al-Qaeda. Remember, Obama imposed a complete weapons ban in Libya. That's why this was a secret operation. How do we know that's what was happening? According to Fox Business, quote, "The United States supported the secret supply of weapons to Libyan rebels while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, according to federal court documents obtained by Fox News. In a sworn declaration to the District Court of Arizona, May 5th, 2015, a career CIA officer, David Manners, said, "It was then and remains now my opinion that the United States did participate directly or indirectly in the supply of weapons to the Libyan Transitional National Council," end quote. Hillary was secretly supplying weapons to the Libyan Transitional National Council. Do you remember me talking about the TNC in a previous article? That was the group that John McCain was trying to pressure the U.S. and its allies into recognizing as the new legitimate government in Libya. That was also the group that McCain's good ISIS buddy, Muaz Mustafa, was affiliated with. Just a coincidence? Did you catch that this CIA officer was giving testimony at the District Court of Arizona? Have you ever heard of Mark Turi? More from Fox Business, quote, "The timing matters because in the spring of 2011, the Libyan opposition was not formally recognized and the direct supply of arms was not authorized. At that time, the CIA director was David Petraeus." Manners testified before a grand jury investigating American defense contractor Mark Turi, who faces trial this September on 2 counts that he allegedly violated the Arms Control Export Act by making false statements. Turi and his company Turi Defense Group are at the center of an ongoing federal investigation over the source and user of weapons defined in court documents as end user or end use, flowing into Libya as Muammar Gaddafi's regime was collapsing in 2011, end quote. Don't forget that David Petraeus was head of the CIA at this time. He was one of the close friends that McCain got together with in order to start the McCain Institute. Mark Turi and his company, Turi Defense Group, were being investigated for shipping weapons into Libya while there was a weapons ban. CIA officer David Manners had testified on his behalf that Turi was authorized by the federal government to supply the Libyan Transitional National Council with weapons. More from Fox Business, quote, "Manners' declaration supports statements made exclusively to Fox News by Turi about what President Obama's team and members of Congress knew about weapons flowing into the region during the chaotic Arab Spring of 2011. Quote, when this equipment landed in Libya, half went one way and the other half went the other way, Turi said, emphasizing that poor oversight allowed individuals hostile to the United States to get arms. The half that went the other way is the half that ended up in Syria, end quote. Turi was allowed to ship weapons to Libya with authorization from the Obama administration in spite of the arms embargo, and he claims they knew that half of those weapons were being shipped to Syria. More from Fox Business, quote, Turi was one of several thousand U.S. arms contractors licensed by the State Department to sell and move weapons around the world. He's been a go-to guy for the U.S. government, most recently in Iraq and Afghanistan. I got involved in this business in the 1990s, Turi explained. I've been involved in all types of operations regarding transportation, logistics, and liaising with those foreign governments. Turi admits to a criminal history. He told Fox that in the late 1980s, he stole a computer, his roommate's car, and wrote bad checks, including one for $100,000. Through court records, Fox News verified he was arrested, convicted, and served time in an Arizona jail. In my youth, I made some very, very bad mistakes. I was discharged from the United States Navy under other than honorable conditions, and I've been fighting ever since to get that honor back. End quote. Don't miss these important connections. Turi was being investigated in Arizona. He had been discharged from the U.S. Navy. Do those clues offer any hints as to who Mark Turi was directly connected to? What are the odds that he was working with McCain? Those odds are really high. He was a licensed arms dealer with the State Department and was a go-to guy for our government in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do not forget that huge data point. He also had a long criminal record in his younger years until he became a weapons dealer in the 1990s. How does a guy who has been kicked out of the Navy and has a long history of criminal activity become a major arms dealer for our government in Iraq and Afghanistan? Did you know that Turi isn't his real last name? According to Arizona Central, quote, in March 1987, an Arizona State University sophomore named Mark Chapman slipped into Old Main, an historic building on the Tempe campus, and ripped off $10,000 worth of computer equipment. Within months, according to court records, he was a convicted felon, stripped of civil rights, and barred from possessing firearms. 24 years later, in March 2011, an international arms dealer named Mark D. Turi set up a $534 million deal to ship military weapons from Eastern Europe to rebel fighters in Libya's civil war. Within months, according to court records, federal agents swarmed over Turi's Scottsdale residence and seized his computer. He was charged with violating the U.S. Arms Export Control Act. Seemingly unrelated incidents, but with a common denominator. The student and the arms merchant are just one person. A mysterious figure named Mark, whose story contains all the elements of a spy novel. Be advised that this saga, full of spooks and political misdirection, twists the mind. The CIA is involved. Also, Bulgarian arms manufacturers, Benghazi terrorists, Libyan rebels, and U.S. political operatives. End quote. This young career criminal had been given a new lease on life, along with a new identity. He was a CIA asset and specialized in selling weapons in war zones. He was also connected to McCain. More from Arizona Central, quote, it is unclear when the first big deal went down, but by 2010, Turi Defense Group had hit pay dirt, supplying $14 million in arms to the National Director of Security, Afghanistan's CIA-supported intelligence agency. At the same time, Arab Spring insurgencies erupted in the Middle East, creating new arms markets. Here's where the story reveals a lot. and connects a lot of dots to Benghazi. Quote, with opportunity ripe, Turi Defense Group applied to the State Department for a permit to ship $195 million worth of Eastern European light and heavy armament and ammunition to Libya. The list included mortars, machine guns, anti-tank rockets, combat rifles, and millions of rounds of ammo. While those requests were pending, Clinton and Chris Stevens, then special U.S. representative to Libya, met with Mustafa Jibril, leader of the rebels' National Transitional Council. Obama simultaneously authorized air attacks on Gaddafi's military. The application from Turi Defense Group was denied on March 22, 2011. Days later, Turi came up with a plan B. Seek a permit for the arms deal, but don't show Libya as the ultimate destination. He submitted a new State Department application with an identical weapons list, this time listing Qatar as the recipient. Turi negotiated with the manufacturer while Stevens headed for Libya as the U.S. envoy. End quote. Turi had his first application turned down because there was a weapons embargo by the U.S. and the United Nations in Libya. So he just changed the destination to Qatar, whom the CIA already had close ties to. Qatar would then ship them to Libya. Meanwhile, Hillary and Stevens were meeting with the leader of the Libyan National Transitional Council. Stevens was then appointed by Hillary as a special envoy to Libya. Then what happened? More from Arizona Central. Quote, Stevens and his entourage arrived in Benghazi on April 5th, 2011, aboard a Greek ship, the Aegean Pearl. His assignment was to quietly develop a relationship with resistance forces. End quote. Hillary was already using Stevens to create a working relationship with these al-Qaeda groups in Libya. They snuck Stevens into Libya before Gaddafi was overthrown, but Hillary wasn't the only one that had a relationship with Stevens. Guess who else did? More from Arizona Central. Quote, 1 week before Stevens was sworn in as ambassador to Libya, court records show Turi exchanged emails with him seeking help with his State Department permit. Stevens thanked Turi for the information, adding, I'll keep it in mind and share it with my colleagues in Washington. Clinton, meanwhile, was still weighing U.S. support for the insurgents. According to Politico, she messaged one of her State Department colleagues that month, FYI, the idea of using private security experts to arm the opposition should be considered. End quote. Turi had reached out to Stevens to help him get his weapons deal via Qatar approved, and the next thing you know, Hillary was considering using private weapons dealers to help al-Qaeda in Libya. What happened next? Quote, Turi's guns to Qatar application was approved. All systems appeared to be go. And as Turi informed associates, the price tag was now set at $276 million because the U.S. Department of State denied Libya. Congressional records show the Obama administration continued struggling with the Libya dilemma behind the scenes and considered a deal very similar to Turi's. End quote. But here's where the story takes an interesting twist. Do you remember what was mentioned in my previous article, We Won't Forget? Trey Gowdy was focused on a particular individual in his Benghazi investigation and proved that Hillary was lying about turning over all her emails pertaining to Benghazi. Gowdy knew she was lying because he obtained the emails from longtime confidant Sidney Blumenthal. Sidney Blumenthal, seen here, arriving to be deposed by the House Select Committee on Benghazi on June 16, 2015. Hillary didn't turn over any of her emails between herself and Blumenthal to Congress. Why? What was she trying to hide? More from Arizona Central. Quote, on July 14, 2011, Clinton family confidant Sidney Blumenthal sent a note to Clinton about an upcoming visit to Turkey, where she could meet with retired Army Major General David Grange, another arms broker. Blumenthal wanted the U.S. to sign a $114 million contract for Grange's company, Osprey Global Solutions, to deliver equipment to anti-Gaddafi forces via hospital ship. His message to Clinton sounded much like Tourie's gambit. This is a private contract. It puts Americans in a central role without being direct battle combatants. The National Transitional Council wants to demonstrate they are pro-US. Blumenthal's communications went to Clinton's private email account, which became the subject of fierce controversy and congressional investigations. End quote. It is really important to understand that Sidney Blumenthal did not work for Hillary at the State Department. He has been very close to Hillary going back to when he worked for the Clinton administration. Where did he work? He worked for the Clinton Foundation. That's not a coincidence. More from Arizona Central. Quote, in an FBI interview, Blumenthal acknowledged he had ties to Osprey and stood to receive a finder's fee if the deal came to fruition. A day after Blumenthal's email to Clinton, the Obama administration recognized the National Transitional Council as Libya's government, giving it access to $30 billion held in U.S. accounts previously controlled by Gaddafi. End quote. Blumenthal's job at the Clinton Foundation was to secure deals, which is why he was getting finder's fees. Do you think that the Clinton Foundation wasn't going to get their share of this arms deal to Libya? It took only one day after Blumenthal's email to Hillary for Obama to recognize McCain's al-Qaeda buddies at the National Transitional Council as the new recognized government and release $30 billion of Gaddafi's held accounts in the U.S. No wonder Abdel Hakim Belhaj, the leader of LIFG, instantly became a billionaire and could then buy airlines and shipping companies to transport terrorists being trained in Benghazi to Syria for ISIS. But then, what happened to Mark Tourie right after his weapons deal with Qatar was approved by the State Department? More from Arizona Central. Quote, on July 22nd, 2011, according to Tourie, about 20 heavily armed Department of Homeland Security and Department of Defense agents stormed his Scottsdale residence with a search warrant, seizing evidence of criminal conduct. The raid was handled so quietly. There was not a single news report. Charges were not filed. After questioning by agents, Tourie remained free. In correspondence with the Republic, he claimed the State Department letter authorizing his arms to Qatar application arrived 2 days after the raid, but with a criminal investigation underway, the deal worth $534 million was kaput. A State Department official declined to answer questions about the Tourie affair, saying, "We have no comment on licensing activity per federal regulations." End quote. Can you see what happened? McCain and his buddy Tourie were going to enrich themselves, arming al-Qaeda in Benghazi, but Hillary decided to cut her own deal to funnel money into the Clinton Foundation. Obama was in on the deal. More from Arizona Central. In December 2012, based on unnamed sources, the New York Times reported that Obama's administration secretly gave its blessing to arms shipments to Libyan rebels from Qatar. But American officials later grew alarmed as evidence grew that Qatar was turning some of the weapons over to Islamic militants. The Times mentioned that Tourie Defense Group was under investigation, though the company never actually sent weapons to Libya. Tourie told the newspaper that U.S. officials shut down his proposed arms pipeline because he was getting in the way of the Obama administration's dealings with Qatar. End quote. Tourie was targeted to keep him quiet. He was a long-time arms dealer for our government and a CIA asset. More from Arizona Central. Quote, for 31 months, federal prosecutors in Phoenix and counter-espionage lawyers in the Justice Department's National Security Division took no public action in Tourie's case. On February 11, 2014, a federal grand jury in Phoenix finally handed up the 4-count indictment. Tourie was accused of lying to the State Department and violating U.S. arms export laws. Their case theory? Tourie's deal with Qatar ultimately was intended to get around the Libyan embargo. The case, as spelled out by prosecutors, was puzzling. Turi never delivered any arms. He sought State Department approval, and the government failed to seek an indictment for nearly 3 years. End quote. Turi was given State Department approval, but never delivered any weapons to Qatar. But the Obama administration sure did. Hillary and Obama stole Turi's plan to enrich themselves. Turi's lawyer was Phoenix attorney Jean-Jacques Cabot. More from Arizona Central. Quote, Cabot's legal strategy hinged on what's known as a public authority defense, asserting that Turi's gun-running plan was authorized by the government, or at least he reasonably believed so. In court filings, Cabot sought evidence that Clinton secretly armed the Libyan insurgents through other private brokers. He claimed Turi was a CIA contractor working with agents, and the U.S. did, in fact, covertly arm the Libyan rebels using a plan remarkably similar to the one at issue here. End quote. Here's where we see the other big player enter the picture. Quote, in May 2016, the defense put together a slideshow for Justice Department lawyers outlining reasons the case should be dismissed. The presentation stressed that Turi had pursued the Libya transaction openly, ultimately received a permit for the Qatar shipment, and had even contacted Arizona Senator John McCain's office for support. One slide featured a March 2011 message from Turi to a McCain staffer describing his company as the single largest private supplier of weapons and ammunition into Afghanistan. Turi explained that Libyan fighters were requesting firepower and he was seeking State Department licenses to begin delivery immediately. We feel this option provides an avenue to limit U.S. involvement while supporting the opposition forces. Within weeks of that message being sent, McCain became a leading voice for arming Libya's anti-Gaddafi forces. As reported at the time by CNN, the senator argued that Western powers need to do more to facilitate the delivery of weapons and training for the rebels. End quote. It's always about the money. Turi was always connected to McCain, and that's not surprising. McCain had helped him get his application approved because he was supposed to get a cut of the deal. But don't miss this huge part of the story. Turi was the biggest private arms supplier in Afghanistan. That will play a big part in my next article. So, what happened to Turi after he was cut out of the deal? More from AZ Central. Quote, federal lawyers tried to use the government's state secrets privilege as a shield, but with limited success. After 2.5 years, and with trial scheduled to begin on Election Day, U.S. District Judge David Campbell ordered prosecutors to hand over key documents. The deadline was October 5th. With 2 days to spare, the Justice Department agreed to throw out its 5-year criminal case. End quote. The DOJ was forced to drop the case to prevent handing over evidence that would have implicated Hillary. Hillary was the one behind the weapon sales to al-Qaeda in Benghazi. She was also behind the transfer of surface-to-air missiles into Syria. According to Business Insider, quote, the official position is that the U.S. has refused to allow heavy weapons into Syria, but there's growing evidence that U.S. agents, particularly murdered Ambassador Chris Stevens, were at least aware of heavy weapons moving from Libya to jihadist Syrian rebels. In March 2011, Stevens became the official U.S. liaison to the al-Qaeda-linked Libyan opposition, working directly with Abdel Hakim Belhaj in the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, a group that has now disbanded, with some fighters reportedly participating in the attack that took Stevens' life. End quote. Obama was publicly denying heavy weapons were being shipped from Libya to Syria. But did you catch that huge piece of the puzzle. More than a year before Stevens would be named Obama's new ambassador to Libya, he was named the official U.S. liaison to the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. That was Belhage's terrorist group that had joined al-Qaeda in 2007. Some of his members had actually participated in the attack on the consulate that killed Stevens. Belhage also led the February 17th Martyrs Brigade, which got its name because that was the day that they launched uprisings to overthrow Gaddafi. Stevens became their liaison the very next month and was in charge of supplying them with heavy weapons to overthrow Gaddafi. But this same brigade was tasked with helping to secure the consulate where Stevens was killed. They did nothing to stop the attack. Why? The State Department didn't hire them for security. They were actually hired to help transport weapons to Syria, but nobody will tell you that. Christopher Stevens was the middleman between weapons dealers and al-Qaeda, first in Libya and then in Syria. The reason the consulate had so little protection was because Hillary was trying to keep a very small footprint in Libya. She was trying to draw as little attention as possible because this operation was supposed to be kept secret. That's the same reason that there were more CIA operatives in Benghazi than anybody knew about at the time of the attack. It wasn't about securing weapons. That was the cover story. It was about transferring weapons to ISIS in Syria in order to topple Assad. Can you see why I spent so much time in my last article on Belhage and the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group? More from Business Insider. Quote, in November 2011, the Telegraph reported that Belhage, acting as head of the Tripoli Military Council, met with Free Syrian Army leaders in Istanbul and on the border with Turkey in an effort by the new Libyan government to provide money and weapons to the growing insurgency in Syria. End quote. Abdel Hakim Belhage didn't just control al-Qaeda in Syria, he was pretty much controlling the new government at the time. He traveled to Turkey to meet with ISIS and made a deal to ship them weapons. He also owned an airline that was transporting jihadists being trained in Benghazi to Syria via Turkey. Christopher Stevens was the liaison to Belhage and was helping him to ship heavy weapons to ISIS in Syria. Obama, Hillary, and McCain were all involved. Doesn't that raise a huge question? Why did al-Qaeda attack the consulate and kill Stevens? Weren't they working together with him? For many, the answer will be a hard thing to accept. The media narrative was that Stevens was trying to acquire the surface-to-air missiles left over from the Gaddafi regime, and the terrorists didn't want to give them up. How do we know that's not true? More from Business Insider. Quote, last month, the Times of London reported that a Libyan ship carrying the largest consignment of weapons for Syria has docked in Turkey. The shipment reportedly weighed 400 tons and included SA-7 surface-to-air anti-craft missiles and rocket-propelled grenades. Those heavy weapons are most likely from Muammar Gaddafi's stock of about 20,000 portable heat-seeking missiles, the bulk of them SA-7s, that the Libyan leader obtained from the former Eastern Bloc. Reuters reports that Syrian rebels have been using those heavy weapons to shoot down Syrian helicopters and fighter jets. End quote. Ships from Libya were already transporting surface-to-air missiles that were being used to shoot down Syrian helicopters and fighter jets. This wasn't the first one. It was a shipment of 400 tons of weapons that was dropped off in Turkey to be transported over the border into Syria. Do you really think Stevens didn't already know that Belhage was shipping these deadly missiles to ISIS in Syria? More from Business Insider. Quote, the ship's captain was a Libyan from Benghazi and the head of an organization called the Libyan National Council for Relief and Support, which was presumably established by the new government. That means that Ambassador Stevens had only one person, Belhage, between him and the Benghazi man who brought heavy weapons to Syria. Furthermore, we know that jihadists are the best fighters in the Syrian opposition. But where did they come from? And if the new Libyan government was sending seasoned Islamic fighters and 400 tons of heavy weapons to Syria through a port in southern Turkey, a deal brokered by Stevens's primary Libyan contact during the Libyan Revolution, then the governments of Turkey and the United States surely knew about it. End quote. The timeline of events is very important. This ship full of shoulder-fired missiles from Libya wasn't supposed to be discovered. It was never supposed to be made public. This story would contribute to the attack that killed Stevens. I will lay out that timeline and prove that Stevens was sacrificed to hide the treason. But you got to stay tuned for my next article. And that's our show, my friends. Guys, support what I do here. I know I've been really absent a lot. I want you to help me out. Check out this new Tulip Blooms ad and use promo code Shapiro with it. At Tulip Blooms, we believe in more than just skincare. We believe in freedom. We believe in natural products made by Americans for Americans, using nature's finest ingredients to help you feel your best, naturally. Each Tulip Blooms product is carefully crafted with pure organic ingredients, no chemicals, no compromises, just clean, natural skincare you can trust. Our mission? To support your well-being while standing for the values that make this country great. We know what matters to you: freedom, family, and a healthy way of life. That's why every purchase at tulipblooms.shop supports American jobs and a brand that values your freedom. Join the movement. Support a company that believes what you believe in. Visit tulipblooms.shop today. Tulip Blooms, natural skincare for patriots. Long story short, guys, I do take a look at how many times promo code Shapiro is used. If you like what I do here and you want to see more of it, make a purchase at tulipblooms.shop. That's the business that we're really trying to grow right now. So the products are amazing, guys. Like, I want to be able to make the new Vicks Vapo Rub competitor for Vicks Vapo Rub. The castor blend, it's amazing. I mean, just right on the skin. Now, I look really red right now because I tanned today, but oh man, when it comes in from Myrtle Beach, it's going to be friggin' epic. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I look forward to the next Joe Lang article. I kind of think he knows, but he just kind of pieces out right in the middle of a thought. So you got to take it how it comes, guys. All right, let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you tomorrow.